Okay, without further ado, I will hand over to Bo, who will tell you a little bit about EBCU, and then we'll be able to start the presentation. Over to you, Bo.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. I hope you can hear me all. I'm located in the most northern part of Denmark right now in my small office. And I'm a chairman of this European Beer Consumer Organization. And the long, boring story, we actually turned 30 last year, so you can find it on our webpage, the EBCU.org as well. But we are an umbrella organization, mainly with focus on networking through the different beer consumer organizations. I see we have some representative from beer consumers organization from all over Europe as well. In a lot of countries, there is organized beer consumers union. And for many years ago, as in 30 plus, we formed this networking more formal wise, and we are still in the progress of improving this one. First, I'll tell you actually a small secret on this one, as that our next country in our umbrella will be Iceland, and in 1 month I think there will be a full member from Iceland organization. And please go to our webpage and read what they're called, because that's more difficult than the Polish thing, so Brett will do that for sure. But that seems that we are developing, and there's organized beer consumers in many countries. We of course have some main goals, and the main goal is of course diversity, pricing, and most of all information of beer. A skilled beer consumer is always a better consumer also for the breweries, as I see it. So we have a great network, actually representing 220,000 organized members all over Europe. So if you're not a member of one of these organizations, please go and join it. And one of the things we do to spread the word of all this is that we are looking around in our network and find some interesting subject and find the people who can tell about it. And that's maybe one of the things we have called Henri tonight to this Trappist. And I know there's been some in the future, there'll be some good ones as well. And also in the past, we had some very exciting ones. I remember the last one with the Italian grape ale. That was great things to do as well. So go to your national organization and ask them a bit more about this European Beer Consumer Union things. We have some election coming up as well. You can get a spot. We are a lot of delegates who are very interested in this work. But to join the network, go to your national organization. I'll be on the chat all night as well. So if you have any questions to the organization thing, I can do it together with drinking my Limfjordsporter. Sorry, Henri. So please be free to put on something else, and I'll try to ask it. I can also see on the guest list that we have a lot of other organizations, Ireland, England, Belgium, Netherlands, and of course Poland. Yeah, a lot of them. So we can do that as well. So back to you, Brett.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Well, okay, without further ado, I'll hand over to Henri. Henri, I've got the presentation, so I will share my screen, and I will wait for you to start. And as I said, if I could encourage you folks to use the chat window if you have any questions. Over to you, Henri.
Okay, thank you very much, Bo and Brett. Maybe for those who don't know me, my name is Henri Reuchlin. I founded the beer education Stibon in the Netherlands, and since we're talking online today, we also have something called Stib Online. I was a former chairman of EBCU, and I've been an advisor for the Trappist in Zundert for over 10 years, and I also was an advisor to the Trappists in England, Tint Meadow. So Trappist has been important part of my working life, and I'm very happy to be able to share some stories and tell a little bit about Trappist beers, what makes them special, and also of course the people who are brewing it, or at least for whom they are brewed. If you have any questions, please ask them. I love questions. It helps me also to really address the different topics that you might want to hear. So don't hesitate to put questions in the chat, and then every once in a while we'll ask Chat or Brett if there's something, if I missed it myself. Brett, I think, well, you already did that. You moved to the next slide, which is a very useful thing to do, because Trappist, of course, we're talking about beers made by monks. For those who are not very familiar with it, what is a monk? A monk is a person, normally, of course, and in fact, there are two types of monks. You have one that lives very solitarily, but they usually don't brew beer. The other ones live in communion. And usually, at least the monks that we will be talking about, the Trappists, they live in isolation and in silence, and they really focus on repentance and contemplation. So they kind of make themselves apart from the rest of the world, to pray for us and to search God and in everything they do. There are also monks who are, on the other hand, very active, and they will try to spread the gospel. It's very interesting. Those monks, in fact, I'm living in The Hague in the Netherlands. I'm Dutch, as you might have guessed from my accent. Those monks also make beer. But where Trappists do that, and I will come to that a little bit later, where Trappists are doing that to pay for their living, those monks in The Hague, they started a brewery, but they did this because they really wanted to talk to people, and they thought, well, the best way to talk to people is to brew beer, because beer, as we all know, bring people together. But we're not talking about those monks. We're talking about the Trappists, and I'm going to take you way back in history, around the year 500. That's about the first time that monasticism, so living in the monasteries, started in Europe, by a Italian clergyman by the name of Benedict, now known as Saint Benedict. And he said, okay, if we really want to find God in ourselves and help the world, we should get together in a congregation, live very solemn, live very simple, and in fact live very much by ourselves. That is to say, they also had to live from the works of their hands. So that might be the next screen, Bo. Yeah, thank you. Or Bo, Brett, I'm sorry. I will make this mistake more times, but you kind of get where I'm getting to. So he said, okay, we will live in communion as monks, but we will separate ourselves a little bit from the world, so we can really focus on religion, and we will live very honest, and we will live very simple life. And they had to make money. In fact, the whole monastery had to be self-sufficient. So every labor, everything that needed to be done had to be done by monks. You're a little bit too fast, Brett. You're outpacing my story. I know you want to get. Oh, if you want to get this over, that's fine. Then just we'll. So I'm still with 500, and one of the most famous rules from Saint Benedict is pray and work. That's basically the idea of living. But monks, being just like ordinary people, if they pray and work, if we would only pray and work, we would work very hard, we would make money, because they couldn't eat everything that they got off the land, so they sold part of it, and so they got richer and richer, and they got, as we all do, maybe if we earn too much money, a little bit lazy. So after about 500 years, and now it's the time for the next slide, thank you. There was this monk, Saint Bernardus, together with some other ones, and he said, okay, I think we forgot the old rule of 500 years ago. We got a little bit less strict than we should have been. So I'd like to go back to the rule of Saint Benedict, really as it was designed, living a very simple life, not eating too much, and be really honest, pray to God. And since he founded this this monastery in the town called Citeaux in France, they are called the Cistercians. So they are the more go back to the origins idea of the Benedictines. Then if we fast forward again, and the Cistercians, by the way, they grew out to be one of the most influential monastic orders of the Middle Ages very quickly. It's quite interesting what they achieved. But of course, they are humans like we all are, and again, they got a little bit slack, and they got a little bit easy, and they got a little bit yeah, they weren't as strict anymore. They started to eat meat. They started to live more opulent, and that was not the idea of Saint Benedict. So again, about 500 years later, around 1600, and that will be the next slide, Brett. There was a monk in again a French monastery, and said we have to go back to the original rules, and we have to live very, very solemn, very easy. The idea was almost to eat so little that you just would not die. They could only drink watered down buttermilk, things like that. So it was very, very strict, and that way they were called the Cistercians of the strict observance. Now try to say that whether you eat when you have been drinking 2 triples, it will be very difficult. So Cistercians of the strict observance is the official name, but luckily this abbot de Rancé was having his monastery in a town called La Trappe, and that will be the next slide, Brett. And because of this town La Trappe, they are called Trappist. So the interesting thing is that the Trappists, in fact, are the most strict of the most strict observers of the Benedictine rule, which was already quite strict. And for me, that's a paradox that I've been working now with the monasteries and the Trappist breweries for over 10 years. I still haven't solved in my head that where people who are really living such a simple life, secluded, because most monasteries are built in secluded places, they produce something like beer, which we all know is better if you drink that in communion together, and which is to do with noise and everything. So that's an interesting paradox. So around 1600 something, the Trappists were founded, and they thrived. But then the French Revolution came, and after that Napoleon. And they were not very big fans of monastic orders, in fact. So what did they do? They decided to abandon all those orders. All the religious people were either persecuted or had to go home. All the possessions were confiscated. Yeah, life became totally impossible for the religious people, and especially for the clergymen in the monasteries. So they took refuge, and that's where the Dutch story almost starts. If there are any questions so far, please put them in the chat. But I just see that Bo got an answer no. Okay, that might be good. So they had to get away from France, And they fled to Switzerland. And Brett, please, the next slide. They fled to a town called Velsant, and there they built a monastery. But there were so many monks, and it was still a little bit scary because nobody knew what Napoleon would do. The abbot in Velsant said, "Okay, please try to find some other places to establish yourself." So some groups tried all over Europe and even beyond. They fled. The group that we are most interested in decided to go to the US. And from Velsant, they went to Westmalle, where the local bishop gave them some place to stay. And then they went on to Amsterdam, in fact, to sail to the USA. So the first Trappists in the Netherlands before 1800 already were there, and they tried to catch a boat to the US. Unfortunately, at that time there was already also a sea war between the English and the French. So there was a big blockade of the harbors and the ports in the Netherlands. So they couldn't leave. And it would have been beautiful for our story if they would have set up a monastery in Amsterdam. But at that time it was very Protestant and not very Catholic friendly. So they decided to go back to Westmalle. To set up shop there because the local bishop was very friendly. That lasted exactly 1 year, because then Napoleon decided to invade Belgium and they were expelled again. And they decided to go to Prussia, now Germany, to Darfeld. It's in the neighborhood of Münster. And they stayed there during the Napoleonic Wars. But they were French. And the French and the Germans were not very friendly. So the Germans said, "Okay, well, it's fine that you're a refugee, but still you're a refugee from a country that is our enemy." It's a little bit like the Russians fleeing their home now. Are we going to accept them, or are we going to say you are Russian? So those tensions are centuries old, and also there in Germany. They got some problems because they were French. So they decided to leave. Once Napoleon was defeated, they decided to leave and go back to France and go back to these regions. And one of the places they went back to is Westmalle. So that's the next slide, Brett. And here you see Westmalle, the Netherlands, because we think of Westmalle as a Belgian monastery, but when it was founded, this part of Belgium was part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So the first brewing Trappist monastery was not located in Belgium, as many people think, but it was located in the Netherlands. Of course, at that time, they didn't brew yet, but it was in fact founded in what we now know as Belgium, but at that time was the Netherlands. So if we're talking about Dutch Trappist, Westmalle will be the first one, and I think you never thought about that. But that's for my history lesson. Of course, that monastery became very populated and very successful. So they created 2 daughter houses. One is in Achel in 1844, and Achel then founded Rochefort in 1887. And Achel I put a little bit in yellow because there's something I wanted to say about it. It's about the Dutch part of it. Rochefort, of course, is a Belgian monastery, very good beers, but it's out of the scope of the story of today. The other monastery they founded in Westmalle is in Tegelen, and they founded that in 1884. And why did they found that? That was again because there was a fear of persecution of religious people in France. So there was a bishop in France who said, "Well, let's help the French. That if war breaks out again, we can have them in the Netherlands," and that's why Tegelen was founded. Well, apart from the people from Darfeld went to Westmalle, the other ones, and that's the next slide, Brett, went to Lagarde and then to the Katzberg of Monde Katz. And you might know that from Trappist beers that don't have the logo Monde Katz. And from there again, they founded Westvleteren and Chimay as beer brewing monasteries. But also in the Netherlands, Koningshoeve. We know that now as La Trappe, and Koningshoeve then founded Zundert. And again, you see Koningshoeve was founded in 1881 because there was a fear of persecution of religious people in France. So every time you see this story, this fear of something going wrong in France, that there are monasteries grounded in either in Belgium or the Netherlands. So the monasteries that we are most interested in are the ones in yellow, and you can see that on the next slide. And they are Achel, and I will touch on that very briefly. Tegelen, also very briefly, but they also brewed Koningshoeve and Zundert. Westmalle started brewing in 1836. By that time, they became Belgian. That's maybe why they became brewers. And the interesting thing is they didn't brew to sell their beer. They really started brewing because the monastery had to be self-sufficient. So, and people needed to drink something and needed something to drink off the land. Of course, in Belgium, there's not that much wine that you can grow, at least not at that time. With global warming, things might change. So they decided to make beer. And in fact, the first 20 years, they didn't even sell the beer. But then people found out that the beer that the monks were drinking was pretty good. And they started selling it, more or less by accident. I will come back to that later. You see that also the Katzberg, Monde Katz, they brewed their beer. They stopped with brewing in 1918, after the First World War, when the brewery was destroyed. Let me first get to Achel, and that's the next slide, Brett. And that's why that shows you why I included Achel in my presentation. Brett, can we see the next slide? That's because what you here see is in fact the borderline between Belgium and the Netherlands, and Achel is really built on the border of Belgium and the Netherlands. And the Belgians are smarter than we are, so we got the church, and the Belgians got the brewery. So that's why it's a Belgian Trappist brewery, but it could have been a Dutch one if they just would have built the monastery the other way around, that we would have gotten the brewery and the Belgians the church. But I guess we got stuck with the church and the Belgians with the beer, and maybe that's better. The beer might have been better that way. Achel brewed from 1850 to 1919. Again, the First World War ended that session of brewing, and then they started again in 1998 until 2021. And 1998 is a date to remember, because at that time also the International Trappist Association was formed, and basically it was formed also because they thought that it needed to protect the brand of Trappist, but they never thought that there would be a new Trappist brewery. But Achel, in fact, just before the turn of the century, was already a new brewery in Trappist land. Next slide, please. Then, of course, and you all know this, I prove, I trust. What makes a Trappist beer? This is my alarm clock. What makes a Trappist beer really, or a beer a Trappist beer? And that's the famous criteria. It must be brewed within or in close proximity of the abbey. So the brewery doesn't really have to be within the walls of the abbey, but has to be very, very close by. It has to be brewed by or under supervision of the monks. And as far as I'm aware, I think only Zundert is the one that there's still a monk brewing in every batch. and maybe tint meadow. But usually it's brewed under supervision of the monks. And then, of course, they're not supposed to make a profit. So every extra money they make, the first money they make is to make a living out of. Then for the upkeep of the buildings, and that's quite sizable because those monasteries are pretty big. And everything that's left over has to go to good causes. And if you meet these criteria, you could be approved by the International Trappist Association, the ITA. And if you're approved or your product is approved, then you get a label. And that's on the next screen. The Trappist label. It doesn't mean that you only have to meet those criteria. It also is they will come to the site to the visits. They come to visit the brewery if it's good enough. They will audit and they will taste the different beers. And so Mont de Cats is a beer brewed for a Trappist monastery, the Katsberg in France. And in fact, it's brewed in a Trappist brewery, Chimay. But because it's brewed in a different Trappist brewery than where the beer belongs to, it doesn't get the label. And the same with Achel, as you might have heard. Also in Achel, of course, the last Trappist monk left the monastery because there were too little people, and that means that the brewery doesn't carry the label anymore. It still brews, but it's not a Trappist authorized beer anymore. Leif, there's a question. So do they need to import their own beer if they want to have a drink? I don't quite get your question.
It's so because the brewery and the monastery are in different countries.
I'm sorry?
Because of the brewery and the monastery are different countries, as you told us in Achel. So do they need to import the things officially from Belgium to the Netherlands?
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. I think the refectory is might also be on the Belgian side, and I'm almost sure that they will not drink beer in the church. So they might be safe by that. And then again, as a private person, you can import, I believe, up to 126 liters, and I trust that they won't do that every day. So. But if the rules would be very strict, then yes, maybe that would be the case. Okay, so that's the Trappist logo. And the interesting thing is I have this old picture of a brewing monk way before the Trappists were even founded, because as you remember, the Trappists only were founded in the 17th century, and they only started brewing in 1836. So the brewing by Trappists is not extremely old. But if you look to this brewing monk, and especially to the star above the brewing kettle, people often think it's the Star of David, but in this case it's not. It's the brewer's star. And if you look into the middle of the star, you see the same figure as the label of the Trappist has. It also has the 6 sides, and that is a kind of sign of protection. It's also almost like as a map of a medieval city where people can attack from every side, but the points will protect the city, basically. So it's a shield also of protection, this six-sided figure. Brett, let's go to a next picture. So the active breweries with a label now are West Vleteren. They already started in 1831. Right after the Dutch left Belgium, they were kicked out. We tried to do a war there, but within 10 days, the Belgians said we want to be free, and they were very successful, and rightfully so. Then Westmalle, Chimay, Koningshoeve-La-Trappe, the Dutch one, 1884, they started brewing. And you see, for instance, Orvaux brews less than 100 years. Achel, of course, is out of the equation now. Engelstel started brewing in 2012, Zundert in 2013, and I will come back to Zundert, of course. Tre Fontane 2 years later, just like Spencer, but they stopped brewing as well. And then the newest kid on the block is Mount St. Bernard with their beer Tin Meadow. Just a quick word on the Trappist Association, because they really make the rules. On the next slide, because it also has an interesting history. For the first time in 1928, they already started to band together to see if they could make a kind of association of Trappist producing monasteries, or Trappist product producing monasteries. Mind you, the label is not only for beer. So there's also cookies with a label, or cheese, or bread, or soap. So it's not only a beer label; it's for every Trappist produce, and it all has to do by the rules that I just said. And in fact, until 1962, the name Trappist wasn't even trademarked, so everybody could use that. And that already was done in 1926 by a brewery in close to Antwerp, and that's why in 28 the monasteries came together to discuss if they could protect it. They didn't succeed then. In 62, Orval was the owner of the trademark Trappist, and if you look in the trademark register, you still will see that Trappist in Belgium and the Netherlands is a trademark not by the Trappist Association, but it's owned by Orval. And then finally, in 1992, they founded the International Trappist Association. So that's pretty new. And then only in 1997 they founded the label. And that was just in time before the monks in Achel started to brew. So it was always to protect the name Trappist against imposters, and I think where they never thought of in 1997 when they had the label that in fact there would be more and more brewing Trappist monasteries. We had 12 at a certain time. We're back to 10 now. But they basically set the rule. There's one monastery I was going to tell you very shortly about. That's a monastery called Tegelen, founded in when was it? 1881, I believe. And they started brewing again, just like Westmalle, who was the founding monastery of Tegelen, to make beer for themselves. And they sold a little bit of that beer, but basically it was for their own consumption. And you see a small advertisement in the next page where they say old Trappist beer. Old is then like alt, and a style of beer to be sold to the public. It wasn't their main source of income. It was just a kind of handy source of income for them. They stopped brewing during the Second World War. And they never resumed again. In 1949, they permanently stopped. They were known for their, especially for their spirits and for their liquors. So that's and they were sold under the name La Trappe. So La Trappe, the name that Koningshoeve now use for their beer, in fact wasn't owned by Koningshoeve. It was owned by Tegelen, and they sold it in 1980 for 1 guilder. They licensed it to the monastery in Koningshoeve, who now really makes the big brand La Trappe that we all know. Tegelen, the monastery, has been closed down again. Not enough monks, and it merged with a monastery in Echt, which is on the next slide. And Echt is not known for any drinks. They don't produce any alcoholic drinks. They are known for their pigs. They have excellent pork meat. So the abbot is also well. They are known as the pigs, the pigs monastery, at least in the Netherlands, Lievar, that's the name of their pork, is very well known and very high regarded. So Echt is one of the monasteries in the Netherlands that's still a Trappist monastery but doesn't brew any beer. And the list of Trappist abbeys in the Netherlands is even a little bit longer. Brett, that's on the next page. Because we have 5 and only 3 of them brew. So we still have 3 left that could start brewing. So Koningshoef in Tilburg, owners of La Trappe is the first one. Then Maria Toevlucht in Zundert is the second one. Koningsoord in Arnhem is very interesting because it's not monks but nuns living there, and there's nothing in the rules that nuns couldn't brew beer. So we could even have a Trappist beer brewed by nuns. It doesn't exist yet, but it could be possible. Then the one in Echt, and the last one is in Schiermonnikoog, one of the islands in the north. And I think there's only 5 monks or something living there. So that's a very, very small monastery. And to give you an idea, so we have 10 brewing Trappist monasteries in the world. And we have about 110 monasteries. So there could be still 100 more Trappist breweries if they all started brewing. So there are many, many more Trappist monasteries than there are breweries. There's a question, are Trappist beers only allowed to be produced in Belgium and the Netherlands? No, that's not true. Every of these 100 monasteries, wherever they are in Africa, they are in every continent except for Antarctica. If they start brewing beer, and they do it by the rules, they can have a Trappist beer. So Spencer, they now stop brewing in the US, but that would be a Trappist beer. And there's also in Italy, Tre Fontane. In Austria, you have one, Egelsellen, and you have one in England, Tint Meadow. So in fact, Trappist beer can be brewed in every Trappist monastery. So there's still a chance that we will see some new ones. Cardenia in Spain, they're thinking about it, but they also decided to have it brewed by an outside monastery or a brewery. Sorry. Back to the rule of Saint Benedict. So what did he say? Prayer, reading the scripture, mediation, manual labor, and living communion. That's are the most important parts. And that all has to be in balance. And it says in Latin ora et labora, or pray and work, and that is basically how we kind of simplify this rule. It's about praying, it's about reading the scripture, it's about mediation, but it's also, and that's very important, manual labor. And that means the work of your hands, because if you're only busy in your head, with your head, you become crazy. So it's a very smart thinking of Benedict, in fact, that he said there has to be some manual labor as well. Also, okay, and that labor part, that's on the next sheet, Brett. That comes from the idea that such a monastery has to be self-sufficient. So they really have to be, they have to take care of their own everything. They have to make their own clothes. They have to have their own hospital, whatever. Now that mind you, at that time, the monasteries were maybe 100 people living there. Now there's only 10 or maybe 7 or something, and the people become more aged. So now it's not possible anymore, and they have many laymen working for them, also in the breweries. But the idea was always you have to be self-sufficient, so you're independent of the rest of the world. It's also to why did they work? So they had some sense of what ordinary people had to do, because they have to work with their hands as well. So it's a kind of show of solidarity. And it helps you with your spiritual and personal growth. If you're only thinking, then you're going nowhere. But the work has to be done within the monastic day order. So since they go to church 5-6 times a day, then the work has to be interrupted. So you cannot do everything, because this day order is very important. Basically, the first service is at 4 o'clock in the morning, more or less. The last one around 8 o'clock at night, and then they go to sleep. So opening a bar would not really be something that fits monastic Trappist lifestyle. And the main thing is that God may be glorified in all things, and that's for me, I think, the most important part of the whole story. That God may be glorified in all things. It means that praying, but also working, is of equal importance. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you pray to God or you work with your hands. You have to do it with the same attention, and that's what sets Trappist beer apart from all other beers, is the level of attention for every product. Where, at least I know for myself, maybe it's the same for you. Sometimes you have like your Monday mornings are not as fresh as you want them to be. Maybe the weekend was a little bit heavy, so you're not at your best in Monday morning. Or Friday evening, you think, I have this date later on tonight. Let me quickly finish my work, then I can run off. Well, of course, you cannot run off in a monastery, but it's also not the way monks think. Everything you do has to be very thoughtful, very careful, very planned, because it's a way of praying, and that's quite interesting. And I learned when we made a new website for Zundert, for instance, that there's also in the rule of Benedict that you have to use all the vessels, whether you're eating from them or you're brewing beer in them. You have to treat them with the same respect as the vessels you're using in the religious service. So there's a very much attention for detail, and everything is kept in perfect order, because there's no difference whether you're in a religious service or you are brewing your beer. Then there's a question from Anne Betu. How many hectoliters are usually produced on average by these monasteries? Well, the breweries, they depend. I think the smallest, Tint Meadow, might be one of the smallest, is about 1,000. And I guess Chimay will be somewhere close to 200,000. So they're still not humongous big, but there's quite a sizable difference. That the smallest one, the biggest one, is about 200 times as big as the smallest one. And there's also, like I said, the trademark Trappist is owned by Orval, but of course you can they can allow others to use it, and that's, I think they gave the right to decide on that to the Trappist Association, but technically it's part of Orval. And Orval, it's not the scope of my presentation, has a very interesting history as well. So this is a little bit the interesting, or the general part. What are Trappists? Why did they come to the Netherlands? So if there's any questions about that, then I'm happy to take them now. And if not, I'm gonna open one beer, because I've been talking with water so far, but that cannot last forever. And I have to practice my pouring, because it's more like a pina colada, but that's too bad. Okay. Let me go to the first Dutch brewery, which is Koningshoeve. And the interesting name is Koningshoeve. For the Dutch speaking, they know what the word means. But let me translate it literally translates to the King's Farms. Why is it called the King's Farms? Because in fact, the monastery started in some farms, which were founded by the King of the Netherlands, King William II, and he used those farms to fight Napoleon. There he is again. But he also used those farms to start the war against the Belgians who wanted to be independent. But as I said, within 10 days he was back because the Belgians won. So if you look to the first part of the monastery, again that was a farm, and that's on the next slide, Brett. In 1884. And why the Netherlands? Basically, so the French monastery said, okay, we might have persecution of religious people again in France. We are looking for a safe place. And the guy who was instructed to look for a safe place had been fighting with Dutch Catholic soldiers in Italy to protect the Vatican from becoming part of Italy. And he found out that the Dutch were very courageous and good fighters. There they were against the Belgians. I guess they were not. But he said, "Okay, those guys. I know many people from Tilburg who fought in the papal army. Let me found this monastery over there, and that's why he decided to make a monastery in Tilburg. Could have been everywhere, but he decided Tilburg. And Tilburg, in fact, had a very, very interesting history. So they had this farm. They decided to build a monastery, and the monastery had to be something quite big because it would be the first newly built monastery after Napoleon. So it was really a sign of the Catholic Church also to show, okay, guys, we're back, and Napoleon didn't defeat us. And the other thing was, okay, the Netherlands were Protestant, and now we kind of have this renaissance of Catholicism in the Netherlands. So it was really a project undertaken to be impressive. And if you ever go to the monastery, it is impressive. They succeeded. But of course, if you want to build a monastery like that, you need a lot of money, and there wasn't that much money. So they needed to find some income more than just the farms, the Koningshoeve. And the abbot at the time, he saw the success of the beer in Westmalle, which basically was just they were brewing for themselves, and what was left over they sold, and it became a success. Koningshoeve was a little bit different. They started brewing because they needed money, not because they needed beer. They needed money. So they said, okay, let's do that. Let's start a brewery. And the happy thing was that the prior, who later became the abbot, was a son of a brewer in Munich. So he said to one of the monks, Mr. Isidorus Laber, he said, please go to my parents and learn to brew in Munich. So he went, and for a year, he went to Germany to learn to brew. And of course, as we know, in Munich, they make bottom fermented beers. So he learned to brew bottom fermented beer. At the same time, they started to build a brewery. But the brewery, of course, being next to the Belgian border, was very much the beers that we were used to in the Netherlands, which were top fermenting beers, especially in that region. So they built a brewery that is more made for top fermenting beers. So this brewer comes back, fully trained, and finds a brewery that he can work with. So he had to work anyway, and they succeeded in making beers, but they were of pretty dreadful quality. At first it didn't work very well. But happily for the church, there were a lot of schools, there were a lot of elderly homes that said, okay, if this beer is brewed by monks, then we have to have it. So they started drinking that beer. But it's important to know that so the brewing was not by the heart of feeding themselves; it was to need some money. But in fact, the beer was of such a bad quality that in 1895, so about 10 years after they founded the monastery, they even were forced to sell beers not without the Trappist label, because Trappist was equal to beer of inferior quality, which is strange if you understand what I said, that brewing would be the same as spraying. But the first years were very, 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 very hard from them. And because they were also a kind of, how do you call it? A lot of other breweries did like that, because of course the church could brew cheaper, and so the beer was cheaper. So there was this kind of infighting, and Trappist beer at that time didn't have the name that it has now. They started to brew a dark beer, 3.5% alcohol, bottom fermented. Because that was what by then became the trend in the Netherlands, and only in 1928 they started to make a blonde beer of 4%. So even at that time, the custom was to make very light beers in the Netherlands, and Trappist beers were also very light beers. The Westmalle beers was also a very light dark beer. Only later on that there's all kinds of reasons, again, beyond the scope of this presentation, why they turned to the heavier beers. But in the Netherlands, long time, Koningshoef has been brewing very, very light beers and bottom fermented beers. They became bigger and bigger. In 1933, they produced 10,000 hectoliter. But they became so big that the abbot said, "Hey, wait. We are an abbey with a brewery. It's not the idea that the brewery has an abbey to it. The abbey must always be more important." So basically what the abbot said, okay, I don't want you to produce more than 10,000 hectoliter. How many customers do you have? Okay, well, the first 100, that's 10,000 hectoliters. All the other customers you have to send away, and they have to find another supplier. And then, of course, the demand grew again. So by that time, quality had improved. And then the abbot would say again, okay, I told you 10,000, nothing more. So every customer more than 10,000, just go away. We don't want them. And that shows the way of thinking of Trappist monasteries already a little bit. We brew to live. We don't live to brew. Then, of course, in the Second World War, it was very difficult. Quality went down and production went down. But then after the Second World War, they really, really grew again. They really, really expanded, and they started to brew a lager, a Pilsner lager. And they started to expand again. And in fact, they got so commercial that they started to brew private label for supermarket chains. Again, lagers. So the brewery got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then around 1958, 1960, they started to make their first top fermenting triple, La Trappe. Until then, basically pills. So totally different story than we think. But it became so big that the monks couldn't manage it anymore. So then I have to see the year. In 1969, they just decided to sell the whole brewery. In 1969, they sold it to Stella Artois, which is now, of course, AB InBev. So the monks didn't have anything to do anymore with the Koningshoef. The Trappist brewery was not a Trappist brewery anymore. It was just a ordinary brewery. And Stella Artois promised to upkeep all the work and keep all the laborers working. But of course, commercial company as it is, after a few years, they said, well, maybe the machines are a little bit too old. Maybe there are too many people. So we think about to close the whole brewery. And that's what they did. They closed the whole brewery. And they just stopped brewing. So in fact, in Koningshoef, after being commercial, they stopped and they decided to sell everything. And then the monks said, "Yeah, wait, that's not a good sign." By the way, this is another sign. So then the monks said, "Yeah, but that's a waste. We need a brewery, but we need a small brewery." So they bought pieces and parts of the brewery back, and they started to producing beer again. In a very small way, again with the idea, okay, the monastery has to be more important than the brewery, and they became quite successful. For many years, they produced Chimay. In fact, Chimay White. In fact, that was their biggest volume. Was not their own beer, but the Chimay beer. And then when Chimay in the 80s said, "Okay, let's stop," the brewery more or less collapsed again for the so many time because they were too dependent on one client. But by then they had introduced the triple and a double joint their gamma as well. By the way, you can show the next picture, Brett. This is the Old Brewhouse, very old, beautiful building. So it has been a very, it's almost like an accordion. It's been very big and then small again, and then big again and then small again. At a certain they tried to sell it to Heineken, but they weren't interested. They did brew some beers there, by the way, for Amstel. Then to try to sell it to Grols, and they finally entered into a relationship with Bavaria, now known as Swinkels Family Brewers. But they entered in a very interesting combination because they still wanted to be a Trappist beer, and that of course has to be brewed within the walls of a monastery and done by or under the supervision of the monks. So they couldn't just sell everything, and they got into a kind of contract where the monks still own the brand and the recipes and the buildings. Brewing, and that of course was a whole new concept where nobody thought of. So at that time they decided to withdraw the Trappist logo. Many people think people think that they were taken, the logo was stripped away, but in fact, because of the discussion, they decided themselves to say, hey, let's not carry a logo. Let's first discuss the ways this should be properly done. And then after a few years, the Trappist Association, they decided, okay, the way this is done is correct. You can use label again, and ever since they are using the label again, quite rightfully so. On the next picture, by the way, you see on the walls, and that's part of the rule of Saint Benedict. This is of course Latin, as you might see, but if you are translated, it would be they are really monks when they live from the work of their hands. That is basically that's of course very logical to be on a Trappist building. Okay, yeah. So La Trappe decided to really expand, and when they were taken over by they went into corporation. Let me phrase this correctly. With Swinkels, they also kind of expanded their gamma of different beers. If they brewed for Chimay, they could. It couldn't be called a Trappist. Well, there's one thing, and that's a good question, Mark. Every beer from a Trappist monastery could be called a Trappist. The only thing is, it will not automatically get the logo. So the Chimay brewed by La Trappe at that time couldn't carry a logo, but at that time the logo wasn't there yet, so it wasn't an issue. But if that would happen nowadays, and it would be for a prolonged time, of course, if something shuts down and you have to temporarily brew something, then probably there won't be a problem. But this was a contract for a longer time. Then would that logo have existed, then the white Chimay would not have had the logo, because it was not brewed in the monastery of Chimay itself. So that's a good question. That's correct. But since the logo only exists since 1998, and this was before 98, there wasn't an issue. So La Trappe has an enormous amount of different beers. Of course, they have the blonde, they have the double, they have the triple, they have the quadruple, which is kind of standard for Abbey beers. It's also good to remember that Trappist beer is not a beer style. It only says that the beer comes from a Trappist monastery, but whatever beer they want to brew, it's Trappist beer if it meets the rules. As I said before, Koningshoeve made a pils for a very long time, Trappist pils. And in fact, the water glass I have, this is, I don't know if you can see it, but this is the glass. It's called Trappist beer. This is made for pils because that's what they brewed. Then, of course, being a Dutch brewery, they introduced a bock beer, which is a typical Dutch tradition. Well, that's a very German tradition, but we made our own Dutch tradition of it for beer for autumn. So it will be introduced shortly. And then they made some beers, the Isidore, which is where they celebrated 100 years of brewing, and it was named after the first brewer, Isidore Laber, the guy who went to Germany to learn to brew. But they also have a wit beer, and they also have a pure, which is I think it's still top fermented, but it resembles a lager, 4% ABV. So they also show that Trappist beer doesn't always have to be heavy. They have this big range of different beers, and in fact, a year ago they even introduced a 0% beer, so an alcohol-free beer, and that's interesting because the de-alcoholization took place outside the monastery at Swinkels. So there was some discussion whether this could be a Trappist product, but since it was brewed within the walls of the monastery, they were allowed to carry the label of the Trappist Association. Next slide. Brewery very modern in La Trappe again. That God may be glorified in everything. So there's a lot of attention for detail, and so much that the triple, and that's on the next slide, even turned out to be the best beer in the Netherlands a few years ago. And here we see Father Isaac, who is presented the trophy of the best beer in the Netherlands. Of course, the story of La Trappe cannot be finished without a reference to their oak-aged beers, and that's on the next slide. They were, by the way, that's also an interesting story. A lot of discussions. I told you that they brew a quadruple, so they're heavier dark beers. Same kind of style that maybe is brewed by Rochefort and now also by Zundert, but they were the first to call it quadruple. Before that, the name quadruple didn't exist until in 1980. La Trappe decided to coin the phrase quadruple. So the beer did exist, but it didn't have a catchy name, if you want. And then later on, the brewer Lodewijk Swinkels, he's part of the Swinkels family actually, decided to barrel age the quadruple in different barrels. He had seen that, I guess, with Goose Island, seen how successful that is, and they built on that program, and still twice a year La Trappe brings out a barrel aged version of their quadruple, which is very interesting, and it's very interesting to age and to also to taste the differences, how these barrels kind of influence the basic beers. Well, Koningshoeve always was experimental, doing new things, sometimes searching for the limits. And one of the things they were doing is, for instance, brewing together with Brewdog, practice what you preach, which for me is a very spicy combination, Brewdog and La Trappe. And another action they did is to make a habit out of used jeans. So they made an advertisement campaign as well, that jeans could be used to repurposed to wear again. So it's quite spicy to have a monastery, a monastic brewery, and then a jeans brand teaming up to do something about sustainability, and that in fact is I guess the core of La Trappe these days, and especially of Father Isaac, who now even became the abbot. So I should say Dom Isaac. He's very much into sustainability, and you'll see in La Trappe that they go to great length to improve their process. And on the next picture, I think you saw it already, you see the water treatment plant. That's a very, very intriguing plant to treat the water that it becomes so fresh that you could drink it again. And then not with big machines, but with plants. And that's an interesting and very innovative idea of taking care of the environment. And that's that's something that we will see with Zundert a little bit later as well. If you enter as a monk, if you enter a monastery, you will stay there for life. So you kind of make a secret oath that, or not secret, it's an open oath. You make an oath that you will connect yourself with the people who are living in this monastery, but also the land where the monastery is founded. So the attention for the land, which also of course is God's creation, is very, very important. And in Koningshoeve it shows with this water treatment plant. And that maybe fits with the saying that I found from Gustav Mahler, that tradition is not keeping the ashes. You shouldn't do always what you already did. It's more like preserving the flame. And if you want to preserve the flame, you have to add new wood to it, and you have to add new things to it. So tradition is not always doing the same. It's always evolving, always getting better, keeping the flame alive. And that's, I guess, what Koningshoeve does in a very, very intriguing way with their alcohol-free beers, which fits the idea of getting the attention for against overconsumption and not drinking too much. Drinking in moderation, actually, I guess the word is. Okay, that's my story for Koningshoeve. Any questions coming up? If not, then we'll go to Zundert, the second Dutch monastery to start brewing, where I was very much involved. Basically, they decided to start brewing around 2007, 2008. Or at least they started thinking about it. They had a herd of cattle, like Koningshoeve did when they started. And the problem was that the monks were getting older, and the farmer monk, he couldn't tend to the cattle anymore. So they said, wait, this is getting a little bit too much for us. Should we not do something else? And they did a lot of research whether they should go into candle making or into cheese making, but they decided for beer. Luckily for us. And again, so this is also again the tradition, not keeping the ashes but preserving the flame. They had never brewed before, because the monastery in Zundert is called Abdij Maria Toevlucht. Again, difficult Dutch words. But it's if I translate it, it's the Abbey Maria Refuge. So it was built, it was created this time by Koningshoeve, and why? Because they were again afraid of persecution of monks in France. So the abbot of the Koningshoeve wanted to have some separate monasteries ready, that if the French monks had to flee, then they would have a home to come to. He even founded 3 of these refuge monasteries. 2 of them have been closed again, and the 3rd one never used for the French, but it was the one in Zundert, and that kind of stuck. So the monks stayed there, and that's why the monastery is founded. The brewery is not called Brewery Maria Toevlucht, but the brewery is called the Kievit, and in English that would translate as the Lapwing. And that's because, and again, the story of Koningshoeve is repeated. The monastery started as a farm. There was a small farm called the Kievit, the Lapwing, and you see the farm here. Was sold to, or was given to the Abbey of Koningshoeve for the French monks to live in and to make a living out of. And since the monastery or the farm was called the Kievit, they decided to keep that name for the brewery as well. So you see, again, very simple living. First a farm, and then the monastery is built. The one in Zund is not as opulent as the one in Koningshoeve, which is good because we don't have to sell so much beer for the upkeep. It's a little bit easier, but still a lot of buildings. And because it was a farm and there was already a lot of buildings, the monks decided, okay, if we're going to build a brewery, it's not going to be in a new building, but they needed a building that was high enough, and they needed a building that was good enough to build a brewery in. And of course, the highest building in the monastery is a church, but that's not really good for building a brewery in. So they started the brewery in the old haystack, and that's what you see here. This is the old haystack, and that's where they decided to build the brewery. And the next picture, Brett. This is how the brewery looks now. All modernized, and if you look very carefully, you'll see that the walls of the brewery are made of glass. And that's quite special. Why would you make a wall of a brewery of glass? And in the next picture, you can see that even more clearly. So it's a very, very light brewery, very clean, of course, as you can understand. The reason that the walls are made of glass is that the Monument Commission in Zundert said that the beams that you see, the concrete beams, are of monumental value. And in a haystack, you can see all the beams from the inside, the outside, because there's no open building. And they said, well, if you want to build a brewery, we want to be able to see the beams. And we said, well, but it's hard to have an open brewery. They said, well, then think of something else. But if you cannot see the beams, you cannot build. And that's why they decided to make this glass brewery. So if you go in there, it's one of the lightest breweries that you will ever see. If you look on the site, there is like a Google Maps kind of thing where you can walk around the brewery and see for yourself. It's very light and clean brewery. Of course, they've never been brewing before. So we had a discussion with them as well, and maybe also the next slide, Brett. Can I have the next slide, Brett? Yeah. So we had a discussion with okay, what then is the actual feeling of the brewery? What should the beer tell about the brewery? And we discussed that for a very long time. And in fact, we started off with tasting beers because some of the monks never tasted beers, never drank beers. So we tasted Geuze, we tasted Rauchbier, we tasted IPAs, blonde, triple. And one of the first things they said is, we would like a beer that's not unlike any other. Just like Orval is unlike any other, Zundert should be unlike any other as well. And the first decision they made was the color. They said it has to be this copper color. So and then the brewmaster and I, who were with the tasting, said, okay, but that means that you will have some caramel in your beer. And I said, yeah, and we'd like to use some herbs. And in the discussion came, and that fits with what I said with the Koningshoeve, they wanted to use some herbs that really grow in the vicinity of the monastery, which I think is wonderful. So if you taste the zundert, you can actually taste part of the plants that grow around the monastery. That's a secret mixture. I'm not allowed to tell what's in there, but part of it comes from right around zundert. And in fact, sometimes the monks go out themselves to harvest it. And that's what you see in the picture as well. The nature is something that's part of the zundert beer. If you taste it very, very carefully, you can even taste some smoked malts in the beer. And why is there smoked malts? One, because it fits the taste profile that the monks would like. The other reason is, and again, they didn't think of that beforehand, but then as an afterthought, we said, wait, that's quite interesting. The area where the monastery is located is in a place where they used to get peat out of the ground, just like you do in Scotland now for the peated whiskies. And so we used a little bit smoky malt to make a kind of, well, we did it for the taste, but at the same time, it's also a kind of message. Okay, this is part of the ground where we come from. And we have to go one slide back, Brett, back the other way. There is what I wanted to be. Why am I showing you this label? It's quite interesting because here you see that the first zundert didn't have the logo from the Trappist Association. And why? One of the reasons that people need to award the logo is to a tasting, and the first beer was not tasted yet by the Trappist Association because it wasn't there. So we weren't allowed to use the logo. So the first batch of zundert, if you can find it anywhere, you can recognize it by the absence of the logo. You can see where it will be a little bit later, but this is the first label of the first beer. One more. Yeah. So the first beer that Zundert made is the Zundert Trappist. The idea was only to make one beer, so we could just call it Zundert. After the place where the abbey is located, and we were very happy with it. But very quickly, the market said, "Yeah, wait, we don't understand your beer," and that we kind of didn't think about it. That Orval took about 80 years for people to understand, and we wanted to have instant success. So basically, they kept on asking if the monks could make a second beer. And for 5 years, they said no. And only after 5 years, they said, okay, now we are really confident that we understand what beer making is. We understand the Zundert beer that we make. We make a second beer. And that became the Zundert 10, which is on the next slide. And then the Zundert 10 is a quadruple. But then we had to rename the Zundert, the original Zundert. And since it was a style that was not available yet, it was a kind of against the grain, something new, spicy, too dark for a triple, too light for a double, too spicy maybe for a triple as well. We decided to stay with the simplicity of the monks, and we called it simply Zundert 8, which is on the next slide. And we took the chance to make the label a little bit simpler, actually. But then, and that's something that you probably haven't seen yet on the market, but it will come because only a few months ago or a few weeks ago, we decided to add a beer style to the beer anyway. The 10 was easily a quadruple, and we decided to name the Zundert 8 triple, not because it's the best example of a standard triple, but because we found out that consumers really wanted to have the support of what kind of style is it. Even shops said, yeah, but where do we have to put the Zundert? Where does it fit? So we said, it's going to be a little bit awkward against the grain triple, but if you want to fit it in any category, and people nowadays really want to fit it within categories, then it will be against the grain triple. So that's on the next slide. You will see the label. You probably haven't seen it in the shops yet, but it will come to you. It will be now Zundert 8 Triple Trappist. So the name becomes longer and longer and longer. I hope this will be it, that we don't have to add anything to it. But this will be the new presentation of Zundert. At the same time, and that kind of also fits a monastic tradition. In Zundert, we decided that Zundert is located, the abbey is located in really a natural terrain of natural beauty, a protected ecological zone as well. So they decided not to build a bottling plant. It's only brewing, which means that a truck with malt comes in. The water comes from the normal water system, and beer goes out in the truck again. And that means that there's only a limited amount of trucks moving. There's a limited amount of noise, and that kind of fits the silence inside the monastery, but it also helps the silence for this ecological, very important zone where Zundert is located. Up till now, we've been using a Belgian bottler, and that shows the solidarity between the Trappist breweries. We decided to switch, and since earlier this year, Zundert now is bottled at La Trappe. So the monastery in Koningshoeve. So beer is brewed in Zundert, but the bottling will be at La Trappe. In the next picture, you see the two monks, two abbots together at the first bottling of Zundert at Koningshoeve. And then it's transported to wherever it has to go. There's a question, what's represented on the Zundert logo? Maybe we'll go one slide back, Brett. Of course, the names of the beer, but you probably refer to the yellow cornerstone. It's a cornerstone that you will see in every window in Zundert to close the window, and then you see a lapwing or a kievit, which is the name of the farm where the monastery started. And the farm, of course, they quit the farm when they sold the cows, but we see the brewery as a kind of continuation. They don't have cows anymore, they now have yeast, but still it's a kind of livestock if you think about it. A little bit different, a little bit easier also for the monks to tend. So it's a kievit. And if you look very, very carefully to the word Zundert, then the first three letters, Zun, and the last three letters, Ert, are standard letters. You can buy that at any designer shop. The D is a little bit different because that's made in such a way that it makes the connection. It is a little bit like the head feather of the lapwing. So that makes it a connection between the bird and the word Zundert. And that's how we thought about it. There's a lot of questions about the color purple. And that's basically that was created by accident. We wanted a different color, but the designer said, "Well, maybe you want to consider purple as well," and it kind of stuck. So that's why we're now the purple Trappist, and it's a very religious color as well. So it fits, yeah. But we didn't think of it that way when we started. I think I was allowed to talk for 90 minutes, which is almost there. Next slide. What's question for you, because this is a workshop. It was advocated as a workshop. So my question to you now is: what makes a Trappist beer, or what makes a beer a Trappist beer? Who dares? Yeah, on the bed says it has to be brewed under supervision of the monks in the monastery, right? and the profits go to good causes. But then I have a question for you. Yeah, it goes to the monastery, and if it's more than they need, it will go to good causes. It's not that the monks become very rich. That's a little bit the idea. But think of it: if you are a malt and you're in this truck and you're being trucked to a brewery, do you really think, oh well, I'm a malt, I'm gonna behave differently because I'm a Trappist brewery? Or a yeast? Do you really think that the yeast realizes that it's in a Trappist brewery, so it should be doing better work than in a normal brewery? Of course not. For me, the Trappist beer, of course, these are the rules. That's again what John says. It's the quality, and it is. I think, and I stressed it a little bit earlier also. It's the attention for details. It's the attention for quality. It's the attention that God is glorified in everything. And if I give a tour in Zundert, I usually end, and that's also the last picture, at the office of the brewery. You see the walls are white and black, and there's a big window. And normally, if we would have a screen for this big window because you want to be closing it, we would either think we make it gray or we make it black. But the attention for detail you see here in this picture is that no, it's not black, it's not gray, but it's made in such way that when the shutters are down, there's this continuation of this black and white of the wall. And that's what I mean with attention for every detail. And that's, for me, what makes Trappist beer so outstanding. It's not making more and more and more. You restrain yourself in the quantity you make, and what you make must be of excellent quality. Something is terminated. I hope I'm not terminated.
No, I did you want me to put the slide back on, Henri?
Oh, no, but I see somebody said, Wolfgang said it's terminated. So I don't know who's terminated, but can Trappist beer? Oh, this is some interesting. Can Trappist beer be brewed in a monastery in Finland? I don't think there's a Trappist monastery in Finland, to be honest. But I know that there's a Orthodox monastery that at least used to brew beer, or there was beer brewed under its name. So Abbey beer, yes, but I don't think there's a Trappist monastery in Finland, and so you can have a Trappist beer there. The passion of the yeast was once thought to be the hand of God. Yeah, that's true. And Trefontane will stop brewing or will withdraw from the Trappist Association. Yeah, I've heard that rumors as well, but I haven't heard anything confirmed. So it's, for me, it's just rumors. I heard that at least some of the Trappist breweries have their own yeast. That is correct, and they only exchange between other Trappist breweries. I don't know the whole yeast management of the different Trappist breweries. But yes, there are some monasteries that are using the same yeast from another Trappist monastery. So yes, there is exchange. Must Trappist breweries in the Netherlands buy a license? No, it's not buying, it's not paying. They're just allowed to use it. If they have to buy a license from Orval, but Orval, in fact, is the owner, so he has to license. They have to license it, but I think they license it to the Trappist Association, who then allows people to use it. Will there be an oaked-aged version with goose? You want to have the bird in the beer? Trappist label. That's I don't understand the question of Patrick. Maybe somebody can help me.
No, I don't know why a reference to a goose. Ah, Goose Island.
Well, I don't know how many brews there are gonna collab brews there are gonna be. Of course, Tre Fontane did 2, one with Spencer and the other one with Rochefort and Westmalle. And La Trappe did one with Brewdog. I don't know what the plans of La Trappe are. So I don't think so. Because usually the brewers have to have something in common. For instance, with Practice of Your Preach, it was also that part of the profits of that production went to charity. I don't really see, but I might be corrected that a AB InBev daughter would cooperate with the Trappist monastery, but you never know.